The country music died the instant my son screamed. I had only reached out to embrace him at his 40th birthday party, a simple gesture of motherly love. Instead, Ryan recoiled as if I were acid, bellowing, "Don't touch me," loud enough to silence the entire room. Standing there, paralyzed by his venom, I thought I was merely being humiliated. I had no idea this performance was just the opening act of a plan to steal everything I owned. My name is Eleanor Hart. I am 67 years old, a widow living in a quiet corner of Maple Creek, Colorado, but standing there in the manicured backyard of my in-laws' villa, surrounded by people who drove cars worth more than my entire house. I felt less like a person and more like a stain on a silk tablecloth. It was my son, Ryan's 40th birthday. The air smelled of expensive barbecue sauce and the heavy perfume of success. Silver and gold balloons bobbed against the twilight sky. A live band played soft country music from the corner of the patio, the kind that fades into the background of polite conversation. I stood near the buffet table, nursing a glass of iced tea I did not want, watching the crowd. There were colleagues from Ryan's law firm, neighbors from this gated community, and friends of his wife. Ava. They laughed with their heads thrown back, their teeth white and perfect in the string lights. I felt that familiar ache in my joints, the one that comes when you realize you are the oldest and least important person in the room. But I smiled. I was a mother. Smiling is what we do. The master of ceremonies, a hired DJ with a slick voice, called for a toast. Ryan stood near the pool, looking handsome in his linen suit. He was laughing at a joke someone had just made, his back to me. My heart swelled with a fierce, painful pride. He was my boy. We had survived so much to get him here. I stepped forward. I did not think. I just wanted to show him I loved him. I reached out, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind, leaning my cheek against his shoulder blade for a brief second. "Happy birthday." "Honey?" I started to say. Ryan reacted as if I were a burning coal. He did not just stiffen. He exploded. He wrenched himself out of my grip with a violence that nearly sent me stumbling back into a waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes. "Don't touch me." The scream tore through the music. It was not a startled response. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated rage that silenced the band, the laughter, and the wind itself. Ryan spun around to face me, his chest heaving, his face flushed a deep, ugly red. The silence that followed was absolute. Every single eye in the garden locked onto us. I stood there with my hands still raised in the air, frozen in the shape of a hug that was no longer there. A woman in a blue dress near the patio heater grabbed her son's shoulder and pulled him back, creating a physical gap between her child and me, as if I were contagious. Ryan wiped his jacket where my hands had been, his eyes wide and wild. He looked around at the stunned crowd, then back at me, his voice dropping to a theatrical, trembling hiss that carried perfectly across the silent yard. "Jesus. Mum. You have to stop. Some hugs. Some hugs aren't harmless. You know that." He let the sentence hang there, heavy with implication. He did not say what he meant. He did not have to. The silence filled in the blanks with the worst possible things. He was painting a picture of violated boundaries, of a childhood trauma that had never existed, right there in front of his boss and neighbors. I felt the blood drain from my face. The ground beneath my sensible heels felt like it was turning to quicksand. My mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I reached for his arm, desperate to bridge the gap. "Ryan." What are you? Stop. It was Ava. She appeared at his side instantly, her hand resting protectively on his arm. She looked at me not with anger, but with a practiced, condescending pity that was infinitely worse. Eleanor, please, Ava said, her voice dropping to that hushed tone people use in hospitals or funeral homes. Today is Ryan's day. Don't trigger those bad memories right now. We talked about boundaries. She said it as if it were a known fact, as if we had held family meetings about my inappropriate behavior. I looked around the circle of faces. The warmth was gone. The neighbor who had complimented my blouse earlier now looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and repulsion. They thought I was a monster. They thought I had done something unspeakable to my own son. Then I saw her. Lily. My 15-year-old granddaughter was standing by the sliding glass doors. She was holding a plate of cake, her eyes wide, darting from her father's red face to my trembling hands. She looked confused. She looked scared. She took a step toward me, her lips parting as if to ask a question. Lily, I whispered, my voice cracking. But Ava was faster. She reached out and guided Lily firmly back inside the house, blocking her view of me with her own body. I saw Lily glance back once over her shoulder, her expression unreadable, before the glass door slid shut. I stood alone on the patio stones. The humiliation washed over me, hot and stinging, making my eyes burn. But beneath the shame, something colder took root in my gut. Ryan had yelled at me before. He had been annoyed before. But this was different. This was performance art. As I looked at my son, who was now being comforted by his friends as if he were the victim of a great assault, I realized with a sick clarity that this was not a tantrum. This was a prologue. The drive home was a blur of wet snowflakes dying against the windshield of my 10-year-old sedan. The heater rattled, blowing lukewarm air onto my frozen hands. But the chill settling in my bones had nothing to do with the Colorado winter. My mind kept replaying the scene on the patio like a broken record, the sound of Ryan's voice distorting with every loop. Don't touch me. I turned into my driveway, the headlights sweeping over the small, sensible brick house I had fought so hard to keep. I sat in the dark car for a long time, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I was not a fragile woman. I had spent 30 years as the head legal secretary at Silver and Wayland in Denver. I knew how to read contracts, how to manage egos, and how to stand my ground against shouting partners. I had retired early only because Gregory's heart began to fail. And after he passed, I poured every cent of the life insurance and my pension into paying off this mortgage and sending Ryan to the best university money could buy. Ryan had not always been like this. I closed my eyes and saw him as a boy. He was a shy, clingy thing, always hiding in the folds of my skirt when his father came home. Gregory was a hard man. He never hit Ryan. He prided himself on that, but his voice was a weapon. He would scream at me over burnt toast or a misplaced bill, his rage shaking the walls. Ryan would tremble, burying his face in my stomach, and I would wrap my arms around him, becoming a human shield. I absorbed the noise so he wouldn't have to. When Gregory died in a car accident just after Ryan turned 18, I thought the fear would die with him. For years, it was just the two of us against the world. We were a team. I was his anchor. But then came Ava. Ryan met her 5 years ago. She was a marketing executive with sharp eyes and a vocabulary full of buzzwords I had to look up. Slowly, the calls stopped coming on Sundays. The visits became shorter. and Ryan started flinching. I remembered the family therapy session they dragged me to last year. Ava had sat there, perfectly poised, talking about enmeshment and healthy boundaries. Ryan had wept, his shoulders shaking, saying, "I always felt so trapped growing up, like I couldn't breathe." I had reached out to hold his hand then, and he had pulled away. At the time, I thought he was talking about Gregory. I thought he was talking about the house filled with yelling. Now, sitting in my cold car, I realized they had let me believe that lie while they rewrote the history books. A sudden, sharp memory surfaced, piercing through the confusion. Ryan was 8 years old. Gregory had been drunk, stumbling through the hallway, and he had grabbed Ryan's shoulder too hard to move him out of the way. "Don't touch me." Ryan had screamed then. He had screamed it at his father. He had screamed it because he was terrified. Tonight, he had used the exact same tone, the exact same pitch, but he had aimed it at me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Why now? I thought about the folder of documents sitting in my safe inside. Between the settlement from Gregory's accident, my savings, and the appreciation of this house, I was worth nearly $600,000. It was everything I had. In my mind, it was already theirs, split down the middle for Ryan and my sweet granddaughter, Lily, in my will. But lately, the conversations had changed texture. "Mom, you really should think about the future," Ryan had said just last week, sliding a glossy brochure across my coffee table. "This house is too much work for you. Have you looked at Serene Horizons? It is not a nursing home. It is a lifestyle community." I had looked at the brochure. Serene Horizons was beautiful, expensive, and completely isolating. It cost $5,000 a month. To live there, I would have to sell the house and hand over control of my assets. I had laughed it off then, saying I was perfectly capable of mowing my own lawn. Ryan had not laughed. He had looked at Ava, and a silent look passed between them, a look of calculation. I opened the car door and stepped out into the snow. The cold air bit at my cheeks. As I unlocked my front door, the pieces started to click together. The public humiliation, the accusation of violated boundaries, the sudden framing of my affection as something toxic. "You are paranoid, Eleanor," I whispered to the empty hallway. But the echo of the party would not fade. Ryan had not just rejected a hug. He had performed a rejection. He had created a scene, witnesses, and a narrative. And as I locked the deadbolt, 1, 2, 3 turns, just to be safe, I felt a terrifying certainty that my son was no longer the boy I had protected. He was a man who needed money, and he had just decided that his mother was the only thing standing in his way. The silence on my phone the next morning was heavier than the snow piling up on my windowsill. Usually, my Sunday mornings were filled with the buzzing of the church choir group chat or the book club thread discussing who was bringing the wine. Today, the screen was black. Finally, a single message popped up from Martha, a woman I had known for 20 years. "People are talking about last night. Are you okay?" My stomach twisted. I opened Facebook, my fingers trembling slightly. It did not take long to find it. A friend of Ryan had posted a video. It was a 15-second clip, edited with brutal efficiency. It showed only the moment I stepped forward, arms open, and then Ryan's terrified, ear-splitting scream. The caption read, "Respecting boundaries is hard for some generations." So proud of my friend for breaking the cycle. I felt like I was going to be sick. They had cut out the music, the laughter, and the context. In that small rectangle of light, I looked like a predator, and my 6-foot-tall son looked like a helpless child. Then came the email. It arrived at 10 o'clock in the morning, the subject line simply reading, "Regarding Lily." It was from Ava. "Dear Eleanor." It began not mom, not mother. "In light of the traumatic event at the party, we have decided that for the protection of everyone's mental health, you will no longer have unsupervised access to Lily. Any future visits must be conducted with another adult present. We hope you understand that safety is our priority." I barely had time to process the shock before the phone rang. It was Pastor Dan. His voice, usually warm and booming, was thin and cautious. "Eleanor," he said, I heard there was an incident. Listen, if there are things from the past, burdens you need to confess or work through, the church is here to help you repent." I hung up. The rumors had already mutated. They were not just talking about a bad party. They were whispering about abuse. At 2 in the afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Ryan. He was not alone. A man in a beige suit followed him up the walk, carrying a leather briefcase. I opened the door, clutching my cardigan tight around my chest. "Ryan." "Who is this?" "This is Mr. Henderson," Ryan said, refusing to meet my eyes. "He is a specialist in aging family dynamics from Serene Horizons." They sat in my living room. Mr. Henderson folded his hands on his knees and smiled a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hart," he said softly, "Ryan is very concerned about you. Often, as we age, we lose the ability to recognize social cues. We engage in behaviors that inadvertently harm the ones we love." I hugged him. I said, my voice rising. "I hugged my son on his birthday. I have never harmed him. Ryan, look at me. Tell him." Ryan looked at the carpet. "Mom, my memory doesn't match yours. But that doesn't make my trauma less real. When you touch me, it brings back the feeling of being suffocated. I was the one who stopped your father from suffocating you." I snapped. "See, Mr. Henderson interjected smoothly. "Agitation. Denial. These are common symptoms." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Ryan wants to help you relieve this stress. We suggest you sign these. They are standard forms allowing Ryan to manage your medical decisions and your finances. It would take the burden of the household off your shoulders." My legal training kicked in instantly. I reached for the papers. My eyes scanned the dense text. Durable power of attorney. Full asset control. Right to sell real estate. This was not about stress. This was about the house. This was about my $600,000. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck, but I forced my hands to shake, playing the part they had assigned to me. I don't know," I stammered, putting the papers down. "It is so much reading. My eyes are tired. I need to think about this. Leave them here." Ryan's patience snapped. The vulnerable victim mask slipped, revealing the hard, annoyed man beneath. "Mom, don't make this difficult," he said, his voice dropping. "If you don't cooperate, if you can't show you are making safe decisions, we might have to get a judge involved, for the safety of the grandkids. We can't have someone unstable around Lily. I just need a day." "Ryan," I whispered, "please." He stood up, frustrated. "Fine. One day." As they walked back to the car, I watched from behind the lace curtain. I saw Ava texting Ryan. He checked his phone and showed the screen to Mr. Henderson. They both laughed a cold, short sound. I realized then that the scream at the party was not an emotional breakdown. It was a starting gun. They were painting me as a threat so they could legally steal the very roof over my head. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I turned my living room into a war room. I pulled every box of paperwork from the closet, my husband's death certificate, the deed to the house, my life insurance policies, and my will. I thought I knew exactly what was in those boxes. But fear has a way of making you double-check reality. What I found in the file marked bank correspondence made my blood run cold. It was a photocopy of a document titled Codicil to the Last Will and Testament, dated just 4 months ago. I stared at it. I had no memory of visiting a notary 4 months ago. I had been recovering from a bad flu then, barely leaving my bed. Yet, there was my signature at the bottom. I called Marcia immediately. Marcia was a retired litigation attorney from Silver and Wayland, a woman who could spot a lie from 3 counties away. She came over within the hour, wearing her reading glasses on a chain. She studied the paper under the kitchen light for a long time. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Look at the tail of the Y in your name. It shakes, and the pressure points are all wrong. This looks like a tracing, or a signature signed under extreme duress. Read clause 4, I whispered. Marcia adjusted her glasses and read aloud. In the event that Eleanor Hart is deemed incapable of self-care, full power of attorney regarding the sale of real estate and liquidation of assets shall transfer immediately to Ryan Hart, the granddaughter. Lily Hart shall receive a stipend of $5,000 only upon the death of Ryan Hart. They cut her out, I said, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Unless he dies, she gets nothing, and he gets the power to sell my house the moment a doctor says I am unfit. But the worst discovery was not the will. It was the stapled packet underneath it. It was an application for Serene Horizons. Attached to it was a medical evaluation form, filled out by a doctor I had never met. Under the section for behavioral history, someone had typed, "Patient exhibits signs of dementia-related disinhibition. Family reports frequent inappropriate behavior with minors." I dropped the paper as if it were on fire. Inappropriate behavior. That was the legal term they were building toward. That was what the scream was for. I needed air. I stepped out onto my front porch, wrapping my shawl tight against the biting wind. Next door, my new neighbor, Mr. Wade, was sitting in his rocking chair, talking loudly into his cell phone. He was a retired insurance fraud investigator, a man with a face like worn leather and eyes that missed nothing. "It is the same old song, Bob," Mr. Wade was saying into the phone, his voice carrying over the hedge. "The kids get greedy, the market goes down, and suddenly Grandma is incompetent. They use the system to rob the grave before the body is even in it." My heart hammered against my ribs. I waited for him to hang up. Then I called out, "Mr. Wade, would you like a cup of tea? I have a fresh pot." 10 minutes later, he was sitting at my kitchen table. I did not tell him it was about me. I told him a hypothetical story about a friend. Mr. Wade took a sip of Earl Grey, looked at the pile of papers on my table, and didn't insult my intelligence by pretending to believe the lie. "Tell your friend," he said, his voice gravelly, "that if she smells a rat, she better start setting traps. Once these things become the truth on paper, it is over. The courts look at documents. not tears. He leaned in, tapping a finger on the table, and tell her to watch out for the public spectacle. If someone screams in a crowded room, they aren't having a breakdown. They are creating witnesses. They are building a case file. When he left, I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me. I went to my computer and pulled up the video of the party that was still circulating on Facebook. I had watched it 10 times with tears in my eyes, but this time, I watched it with the eyes of a legal secretary. I paused. I rewound. I played it frame by frame. There. 2 seconds before I stepped forward, Ava was standing next to Ryan. Her lips moved. She leaned in and drove her elbow sharply into his ribs. It was subtle, masked by her turning body, but it was there. Ryan's face did not look scared in that split second. He looked annoyed. He looked like an actor waiting for his cue. Then I stepped in, and the mask slammed down. I sat back, the screen glowing in the dark room. I had spent years blaming myself for Gregory's violence, thinking I had failed to protect Ryan. I had believed the therapy sessions were about healing, but they weren't. They were reconnaissance. Ryan had taken his childhood trauma, real or imagined, and weaponized it because he needed the money. I was not going to Serene Horizons. I was not going to be labeled a predator to my own granddaughter. I opened a drawer and took out a fresh, black notebook. On the first page, I wrote the date. Then I wrote, "Exhibit of the party." I began to write. I logged the email from Ava. I logged the visit from the fake specialist. I logged the timestamp on the video where Ava nudged him. If they wanted a legal battle, they had forgotten who taught Ryan how to read a contract. I was not just a mother anymore. I was the plaintiff, and I was building my case. The black notebook lay open on my kitchen table, the pages filling up with ink that felt too dark for the white paper. I sat there, rubbing my temples, trying to reconcile the son I raised with the man who was currently plotting my destruction. My mind drifted back to the therapy sessions we had attended a year ago. At the time, I had sat on the plush beige couch, twisting a tissue in my hands, while Ryan stared at the floor. I felt so controlled. Ryan had whispered to the therapist. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like there were hands on me all the time. I had remained silent, nodding my head in sad agreement. I thought he was talking about Gregory. I thought he was finally processing the terror of living in a house ruled by a man who drank his dinner and solved problems with his fists. I did not realize that in Ryan's rewritten history, the hands he felt were not Gregory's. They were mine. I closed my eyes, and the memory hit me, sharp and visceral as the smell of stale bourbon. It was 1998. Ryan was 12. Gregory had come home in a rage because he had been passed over for a promotion. A ceramic vase shattered against the hallway wall. Ryan had tried to run past him to get to his room, but Gregory was faster. He lunged, his large hand clamping down on Ryan's thin shoulder like a vice. "Don't touch me," Ryan had screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure terror. I did not think. I threw myself between them. I pried Gregory's fingers off our son and took the back of his hand across my face. It knocked me into the drywall, but Ryan got away. He ran to his room and locked the door. Later that night, I went to him. He was shaking under his quilt. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight to stop the trembling, rocking him while he sobbed into my chest. "I've got you," I had whispered. "You are safe. Now." I realized with a sick, sinking feeling how those two memories had merged in his mind. The violent grip of his father and the desperate, crushing hug of his mother had blended into one singular sensation suffocation. And because Gregory was dead and gone, I was the only one left to blame. The therapist had encouraged him to name his oppressor, and Ava had handed him my name. I picked up the phone and called Marcia again. "Marcia," I asked, keeping my voice steady, "tell me about recovered memory cases. How often do they hold up?" Marcia sighed on the other end of the line. "It is messy." "Eleanor? If a therapist asks leading questions, if they imply that trauma must have a specific perpetrator, the patient can unconsciously fabricate an entire narrative. They mix real fear with false details. To Ryan, it feels like the truth. That makes it nearly impossible to disprove on the stand." I hung up, feeling a wave of nausea. I was angry. I was furious at Gregory for leaving this wreckage behind. I was furious at myself for staying silent all those years to keep the peace. But mostly, I was furious at Ryan. And then, a different memory surfaced. One I had buried deep because it frightened me too much to look at. Ryan was 20 years old. He was home from college for the summer. He had gone out drinking with his girlfriend, a sweet girl named Sarah. They came back to the house late, shouting. I came down the stairs just in time to see them in the foyer. Ryan had Sarah by the wrist. His grip was tight, his knuckles white. "Let go." "You're hurting me." Sarah had cried out. Ryan didn't let go. His eyes were glazed, absent. "Don't touch me," Sarah screamed, trying to pull away. At the sound of those words, Ryan froze. He dropped her hand as if it were hot iron. He backed away, hyperventilating, looking at his own palms with horror. When the police arrived, neighbours had called them I was the one who smoothed it over. I told the officers it was just a loud argument. I sent Sarah home in a cab. I protected him. I sat up straight in my chair, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Don't touch me" was not just Ryan's trauma response. It was his guilt. He had learned violence from his father, and he had spent his life terrified that he was becoming Gregory. The scream at the party was not about me hugging him. It was a projection. He was taking his own capacity for violence, his own dark history, and forcing it onto me. If he could convince the world and himself that I was the one who didn't understand boundaries, then he didn't have to look in the mirror. My hand shook as I wrote this down in the notebook. If he was willing to twist his own guilt to make me the villain, there was no limit to what he would tell the judge. He wasn't just going to say I was annoying, he was going to say I was dangerous. And he was going to use Lily to prove it. The letter from the insurance company arrived in a nondescript white envelope, innocent until opened. I sliced it with my letter opener, expecting a standard policy update. Instead, I found a notification of change. My primary beneficiary designation had been updated. It no longer read Ryan Hart and Lily Hart, 50-50 split. It now read Ryan Hart, sole beneficiary. I felt a cold numbness spread through my fingers. I called the company immediately, my voice trembling with controlled rage, demanding a copy of the request form. When the fax came through an hour later, I stared at the signature at the bottom. It looked like mine. The loops were mine. But the ink pressure was uneven, hesitant. I looked at the date next to the signature. August 12th. The memory clicked into place like a deadbolt sliding home. August 12th was the day Ryan had insisted on taking me to an urgent care clinic because he claimed my blood pressure looked dangerously high. I had been dizzy, tired, and trusting. He had handed me a clipboard with a stack of forms to sign insurance waivers. He said, "Privacy policies?" He said. I had signed them all without reading, grateful for a son who cared enough to drive me to the doctor. I walked next door to show Mr. Wade. He put on his spectacles, hummed a low, angry sound, and tossed the paper onto his coffee table. "It is the oldest trick in the book. Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with disgust. "They slide the financial forms in between the HIPAA releases. You think you are authorizing a doctor to take your blood pressure. You are actually authorizing your son to take your life savings." Marcia called later that afternoon with more bad news. She had been digging into Ava's background. It turned out my daughter-in-law had a close connection with a financial advisor in Denver who had barely escaped indictment 2 years ago for coercing seniors into high-risk annuities. And that wasn't all. I found an article in the local paper praising Serene Horizons as a strategic partner for the very bank holding my accounts. It was an ecosystem of theft, and I was the prey. My rage was just beginning to boil when a soft knock came at my back door. It was Lily. She looked over her shoulder before slipping inside, her face pale. Ryan and Ava were out of town for a conference, leaving her with a sitter she had easily outsmarted. "Grandma," Lily whispered, sitting at my kitchen table, twisting the strap of her backpack. "Mom and Dad have been fighting. I heard them talking about a deadline. They said the insurance money has to clear before the quarter ends." I poured her a glass of milk, my hands shaking. "Did they say anything else?" "Honey," Lily looked down at the table. "I heard Mom say, if she keeps hugging people like that, we will win faster. She told me that if you ever make me feel uncomfortable, I have to yell. She said I have to speak up so people know I am not lying." The room spun. They were not just stealing my money. They were grooming my granddaughter to be their star witness. They were planting seeds of doubt in her mind, turning my love into something predatory to fit their narrative. "I never wanted to yell at you," Lily said, tears welling up in her eyes. But then something happened with Dad. I froze. "What happened?" "A few months ago," Lily said, her voice barely audible. "Dad wanted me to sign a paper about you. It was a list of times you supposedly touched me inappropriately. I refused. I told him it was a lie." She took a shaky breath. Dad got so mad. He slammed his hand on the table, right next to my arm. It was so loud. I got scared, and without thinking, I screamed at him. I screamed, "Don't touch me." I stared at her, the echo of those words ringing in the silence of my kitchen. "What did he do?" I asked. "He turned white," Lily said. "He looked terrified. He tore up the paper and ran out of the room. He hasn't looked me in the eye since." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. The puzzle was complete. Ryan was not protecting Lily from me. He was projecting his own unresolved trauma, his own guilt, onto the 2 women in his life. The phrase, "don't touch me," was a ghost that haunted him, a legacy of violence he had never confronted. But he had made a fatal mistake. He thought he could use the law to bury me. He forgot that I had spent 40 years typing the very motions and affidavits he was trying to weaponize. "You are brave, Lily," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "And you are not going to sign anything. Neither am I." I stood up. I was done crying. I was done wondering if I was the villain. I looked at the pile of forged documents and the scared face of my granddaughter, and I knew exactly what I had to do. It was time to stop being a mother and start being a plaintiff. The next morning, I stopped crying and started strategizing. With Marcia's guidance, I drove to a law office 3 towns over, a place where neither Ryan nor his high-priced colleagues had any influence. We drafted a new will that was as airtight as a steel drum. I revoked every previous power of attorney and beneficiary designation. I wrote Ryan Hart out of my life completely. "Are you sure about this clause?" Eleanor, the attorney, asked, tapping his pen on the draft. "I am sure," I said, my voice steady. "The bulk of the estate goes to a trust for my granddaughter, Lily Hart. She cannot access a single cent until she turns 21, and even then, only if her father is not a co-signatory. The remainder goes to the Colorado Fund for Elder Justice. From there, I went to the bank. I withdrew my savings, nearly $600,000, and transferred it to a new account at a credit union that had no strategic partnerships with Serene Horizons. I felt a grim satisfaction as I watched the teller count the cashier's check. It was my money. I had scrubbed floors and typed briefs for 40 years to earn it, and I was not going to let it pay for a fraudulent diagnosis. When I got home, Mr. Wade was waiting at my back door with a toolbox. "This will do the trick," he said, holding up a small, innocuous device. We spent an hour setting up the surveillance. We placed a high-definition camera and microphone inside an old oak picture frame sitting on the mantel. It was a photograph of Ryan and me at the Grand Canyon when he was 10. It was the perfect camouflage. The very memory he was trying to twist into a trauma would now serve as the witness to his betrayal. Then, I made the call. I sat in my armchair, took a deep breath, and dialed Ryan's number. When he answered, I let my voice crack. I made myself sound small, confused, and defeated. "Ryan," I whispered. I have been doing a lot of thinking. I am so tired of fighting. Maybe I do have a problem. I don't want to be a burden." The silence on the other end was brief. I could practically hear him calculating his victory. "Oh, Mom," Ryan said, his voice dripping with relief. "I am so glad you are finally seeing reason. We just want what is best for you." "I want to talk," I said. "Can you come over tomorrow? Just you and Ava. We can look at the paperwork for the facility." "Absolutely," he said. "I will bring Thomas, too. You remember him. He is a pastor and a family counselor. He can help mediate, just to make sure everything stays calm." "That sounds wonderful." I lied. Thomas was no pastor. He was the closer from Serene Horizons. Before the meeting, Lily slipped into my house one last time. She handed me an old smartphone with a cracked screen. "I downloaded a recording app for you, Grandma," she said, her young face serious. "It looks like a note-taking app. See, even if they take you into the kitchen away from the hidden camera, just keep this in your pocket. You need to stay away." "Lily," I told her, gripping her shoulders, "I don't want you here when they arrive. They might try to make you say things." "I am not leaving you alone," she insisted. "I will go to Mr. Wade's house. I will watch from the upstairs window. If I see them dragging you or yelling, I am coming over." That night, I did not sleep. The house felt large and empty. I sat at my desk and wrote a letter by hand. It was a statement of facts, detailing my suspicions, the forged signatures, and the coercion. I sealed it in an envelope and marked it, to be opened in the event of my suspicious death or incapacitation. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at myself. I saw the deep lines around my mouth and the grey in my hair. I looked like a grandmother. I looked harmless. That was exactly what they were counting on. This is it. I whispered to my reflection. This is the last chance I give him. If he tells the truth, we fix this. If he lies, I let the sentence hang in the empty air. The morning of the meeting. The sky over Maple Creek was a heavy, bruised purple. Low clouds hung over the rooftops, threatening a storm. I dressed in my softest cardigan and made a pot of coffee, setting out 3 cups. I checked the camera one last time. The red light blinked once, then vanished. I put Lily's phone in my pocket and sat down to wait. It felt less like a family gathering and more like the opening arguments of a murder trial. Only the victim was still sitting in the chair. The hour before the meeting felt suspended in time, like the heavy silence before a tornado touches down. At 9 in the morning, Lily walked down the driveway with her backpack slung over one shoulder, to her parents. She was heading to a friend's house for a study group. In reality, she was heading straight for the strategic vantage point of Mr. Wade's second-floor guest room. I met her by the side of the house, hidden from the street by the overgrown lilac bushes. The wind was biting, whipping her hair across her face. But she didn't seem to feel the cold. She looked small and terrified. "Grandma," she whispered, dropping her bag to the frozen grass. We didn't speak for a moment. We just collided into a hug. It was not the stiff, performative embrace of a distant relative. It was desperate. She buried her face in my wool coat, shaking. "I am so sorry I didn't run to you at the party." She sobbed into my shoulder. "I stood there and let them look at you like that. I was just so scared." "Hush now," I said, smoothing her hair. "You have nothing to apologize for. The shame belongs to the adults in this family, not you." Lily pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. She looked around to make sure we were alone, then lowered her voice. "There is something else," she said, her voice trembling. "Mom, she's so confusing since I was 10 years old. Whenever we visit Uncle Mike or those business partners of Dad, Mom always pushes me forward. She whispers, 'Go give them a hug. Don't be rude. Don't make the adults lose face.' But then," she paused, taking a ragged breath. "But then, with you, she tells me the opposite. She told me last week that if you try to hug me, I have to step back." She said, "If Grandma makes you feel uncomfortable, you have to say it loud. You have to say she is squeezing you too tight." I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. "Did she tell you to use those specific words, that I squeeze too tight?" Lily nodded. She said, "If anyone asks, just remember that she hugs you until you can't breathe." But that is a lie. Grandma, you never do that. You just hold me." My heart broke and hardened at the same time. Ava and Ryan were not just protecting their assets. They were coaching a child to perjure herself. They were turning the concept of boundaries, a vital, important lesson, into a weapon to frame an innocent woman. "Listen to me," I said, gripping her shoulders firmly. "We are going to stop them, but I need you to be safe. You go to Mr. Wade's house. You set up the laptop like we discussed. If you hear screaming, or if you see them trying to force me to go somewhere, you tell Mr. Wade to call 911. Do not come over here yourself. Do you understand?" "I understand," she said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. It was the key to the new safety deposit box I had opened at the credit union the day before. Inside was the new will, the evidence of the forged insurance forms, and a letter explaining everything. "Take this," I said, pressing the cold metal into her palm. If anything happens to me today, or if they manage to take me away to that facility, you give this to Marcia. Do not give it to your father. Do not give it to your mother. Only Marcia." Lily stared at the key, her eyes filling with fresh tears. The reality of what we were doing, pitting ourselves against her parents, seemed to hit her all at once. "I don't want you to go," she whispered. "Grandma, if I have to choose, I choose you. You are the only one who feels safe. The only person who ever hugged me the softest in my whole life is you, not them." Those words were my armor. They stripped away the gaslighting. I was not a monster. I was a sanctuary. And I would burn my relationship with my son to the ground if that was what it took to keep this girl safe. "Go," I said, giving her a gentle push toward the hedge that separated our yards. "Be brave." I watched her run across the frozen lawn and disappear into Mr. Wade's side door. Once she was gone, I composed myself. I walked back into my silent house and locked the door. I went to the living room and adjusted the picture frame on the mantel, ensuring the tiny lens was pointing directly at the sofa. I checked the volume on the hidden recorder. Then, I slipped the smartphone Lily had given me into the deep pocket of my cardigan, the microphone facing out. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock. Tick, tock. It sounded like a countdown. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my skirt, and waited for the doorbell to ring. I was 67 years old. I was alone, and I was ready for war. The doorbell rang exactly at 10 o'clock in the morning. I smoothed the fabric of my cardigan over the hidden phone in my pocket and went to answer it. Ryan stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums that looked too cheerful for a funeral, which was essentially what this was. Ava was beside him, clutching a white bakery box, wearing a smile that looked painted on. Behind them stood Thomas. He was a tall man with silver hair and a suit that whispered money. Ryan had introduced him as a pastor and family counselor, but I knew better. I had seen his face on the Serene Horizons website listed as Director of Intake and Asset Management. "Mom," Ryan said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I flinched internally, but let him make contact. "You look tired. We brought some pastries. Can we come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." We sat in the living room. I took the armchair facing the mantel, ensuring they sat on the sofa, directly in the line of sight of the hidden camera in the picture frame. Thomas placed a briefcase on the floor. He didn't open with a prayer. He opened with a pitch. "Eleanor," Thomas began, his voice like warm syrup. "Ryan and Ava love you very much, but love requires boundaries. We are here to talk about healing, and sometimes healing means stepping back to ensure the safety of the most vulnerable. In this case, your granddaughter. Lily." I folded my hands in my lap. "Safety is Lily in danger. Emotional danger," Ava interjected softly. "After the party, well, we have to be realistic. We think it is best if you restrict your contact with Lily. No unsupervised visits. At least until you are settled in a more structured environment." Ryan nodded, looking at the floor. "It was the party. Mom, you have to understand. When you grabbed me, it triggered everything. I was begging you to stop, and you just wouldn't let go. It was terrifying. I felt the blood hum in my ears. He was lying, and he was doing it effortlessly. "Ryan," I said, keeping my voice low and trembling slightly, playing the part of the confused mother. "I want to understand. Truly. But my memory is so different. Specifically, what exactly do you remember me doing that was illegal or physically harmful?" Ryan looked up, blinking. He had expected me to cry or apologize, not to ask for specifics. "It isn't about illegal," he stammered. "It is about the sensation. You squeezed me. I couldn't breathe. It was just like when I was a kid. The suffocation." "Suffocation," I repeated. "But I didn't hit you. I didn't threaten you. You don't need to hit someone to abuse them." "Mrs. Hart." Thomas cut in smoothly, sensing Ryan's faltering. "Subjective reality is valid. Ryan's pain is valid." Ava cleared her throat and reached for the briefcase. "We can go in circles about the past, or we can focus on the solution. Eleanor, we have prepared the admission paperwork for Serene Horizons. It is a beautiful facility. If you sign the power of attorney today, we can handle the sale of this house and manage your accounts so you don't have to worry about bills ever again. It is the only way to lower the temperature in this family. For Lily's sake." She slid the heavy stack of papers across the coffee table toward me. The same papers I had seen the forged drafts of. I looked at the documents, then up at my son. I let my hands shake visibly. "And if I don't sign?" I asked. My voice barely a whisper. "If I say no?" "What happens?" Then Ryan sighed. A sound of heavy, dramatic exhaustion. "Mum, please don't make us do this the hard way. If you don't sign, we have to protect you from yourself." He leaned forward, his eyes hardening. "The court will look at the medical reports," Ryan said. "They will look at the witnesses from the party who heard me scream. And they will declare that you lack the capacity to make your own decisions. You will lose the right to choose anyway. This way. This way is dignified." "Witnesses," I murmured. "And Lily, does she think I am dangerous?" "Lily is confused," Ava said quickly, her tone sharp. "But she knows what she saw. She is ready to speak to the judge if necessary." "What exactly is she going to say?" "Ava," I asked, pushing just a little harder. "Did she tell you what to write down, or did you write it for her?" Ava's patience snapped. Her face flushed pink. "We only helped her articulate her feelings. She is a child. We just helped her structure her statement so the court would understand clearly that your hugs are suffocating. That is not a crime. Eleanor, that is parenting." The room fell silent. The admission hung in the air, captured by the camera on the mantel and the phone in my pocket. They had admitted to coaching a witness. They had admitted to the blackmail sign or be declared incompetent. Suddenly, the phone in my cardigan pocket buzzed against my ribs. One long vibration. It was the signal. I looked down at the text message preview on the screen. It was from Lily. "I am recording. The police are almost there. Don't sign anything. Grandma." I took a slow, deep breath. The trembling in my hands stopped. I looked at Ryan, then at Ava, and finally at Thomas. The fear evaporated, replaced by the cold, steel spine of a woman who had spent 40 years working in a law firm. "You helped her structure her statement," I repeated, my voice no longer shaking. It was flat and hard. "That is interesting, because usually we call that witness tampering." Ryan frowned, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I am talking about the fact that I am not signing anything," I said, sitting up straight. And I think you should probably take your flowers back. You are going to need the refund money for a lawyer." Thomas pushed the heavy stack of documents toward me, tapping the signature line with a manicured finger. "Sign it?" "Eleanor," he said, his voice tightening. "Do it in front of witnesses so we can ensure the legality of the transfer. It is for your own good." I looked at the pen he was offering. Then I looked at my son. Ryan was watching me with a hunger that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with debt. I stood up slowly. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I walked over to the television cabinet and picked up the small remote control I had synced to the Bluetooth speaker hidden behind the sofa. "I think," I said, my voice steady and loud, "we should listen to the other witnesses first." I pressed the button. Ryan's voice boomed through the living room, clear and undeniable. "The court will look at the medical reports, and they will declare that you lack the capacity to make your own decisions." Ryan froze. Ava dropped her fork. The recording continued. Cutting to Ava's shrill voice from just minutes ago, we only helped her articulate her feelings. We helped her structure her statement so the court would understand. And then, a clip from a month ago that Mr. Wade and I had recovered from a cloud backup. I didn't know I had Ryan discussing the insurance payout timeline. The color drained from Ryan's face, leaving him looking like a corpse. Ava made a small, choking sound. Thomas stood up so fast his chair tipped over. What is this?" Thomas stammered. "Mrs. Hart, you cannot record private conversations without actually—" A gravelly voice interrupted from the kitchen doorway. "In Colorado, you only need one party's consent." And she consented. Mr. Wade stepped into the room, holding his own phone up, recording everything. "I am Robert Wade, retired insurance fraud investigator, and I am witnessing an attempted coerced signature." Before Ryan could speak, the front doorbell rang. It was not a polite ring. It was a demand. I opened the door to reveal 2 uniformed police officers and a woman wearing the badge of the Adult Protective Services. We received a report of elder financial abuse and immediate coercion. The officer said, stepping into the foyer, "Is Eleanor Hart here? I am Eleanor," I said. Ryan scrambled up from the sofa. "Officers? This is a misunderstanding. My mother is confused. He is lying." A young voice cut through the chaos. Lily walked in from the hallway. She was holding Mr. Wade's laptop, the screen facing the officers. It was playing a live feed from the camera on the mantel, showing Ryan threatening me with court action just 10 minutes prior. "I have the video," Lily said, her voice shaking but defiant. "And I have the audio." They tried to make me sign a false statement against my grandmother. I stepped forward, shedding the skin of the victim. I looked at the APS worker. My son and his wife forged my signature on a change of beneficiary form on August 12th. I stated clearly, using the tone I had used in courtrooms for 30 years. They have conspired with this man, Thomas, to force me into a facility against my will to liquidate my assets. I have the forensic evidence in a safe deposit box. Ryan looked at the police, then at the laptop, and finally at Lily. The walls were closing in, and he snapped. "You little traitor," Ryan screamed. He lunged at his daughter, grabbing her wrist and twisting it hard to make her drop the laptop. "Don't touch me," Lily screamed. The sound was identical to the one Ryan had made at the party. But this time, the terror was real. "Hey!" The officer tackled Ryan, pinning him against the wall. "Let her go." Now Ryan released her, panting. Lily pulled her hand back, clutching her wrist. A bright red mark was already forming on her pale skin. The irony hung in the room like smoke. The man who had accused his mother of hugging too hard had just assaulted his child in front of the police. Ryan Hart. "You are under arrest for assault and suspected fraud," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. Another officer moved toward Ava and Thomas. "We are going to need you both to come down to the station for questioning regarding the documents." Ava began to weep. Loud, ugly sobs that garnered no sympathy. Thomas tried to explain that he was just a consultant, but the APS worker was already taking photos of the unsigned power of attorney forms lying on the table like a diffused bomb. They led them out. As the officers pushed Ryan toward the squad car, he twisted his head back to look at me. His eyes were wide with shock, fear, and a deep, burning hatred. He looked like a man waking up from a dream to find himself in a nightmare. I stood in the doorway, the cold wind biting my face. I did not look away. I reached down and took Lily's hand in mine. She squeezed back. "Safe. Grandma," she whispered. "Are you okay? I am," I said softly. "I am not protecting the people who hurt this family anymore." We turned our backs on the flashing lights and walked inside. I closed the heavy oak door, shutting out the sirens and the past. For the first time in 40 years, the house was truly quiet. And as I looked at my granddaughter, I knew we had won. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really want to know where you guys are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this one, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who might need to hear it.